The ballroom of the Dorchester Hotel glittered under the soft glow of a dozen chandeliers. It was a crisp November evening in 2024, and the annual Royal Patrons Gala was in full swing. London's elite mingled with international dignitaries, the air thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low hum of polite conversation. For the royal family, it was a chance to present a united front, a fortress of tradition and stability in an ever-changing world. But within the stone walls of that fortress, fault lines were beginning to show. King Charles III stood near the center of the room, his tall frame clad in a perfectly tailored black tailcoat. He smiled and nodded as an elderly duke recounted a long-winded story about polo in the 1960s. On the surface, the king was the picture of graciousness, but beneath his starched white shirt, a familiar tightness had taken root in his chest. It was the same tension he always felt when two powerful women in his life occupied the same space, their orbits threatening to collide. His gaze drifted across the room. There, by the grand piano, stood his wife, Queen Camilla. She was dressed in a midnight blue gown, the diamond and sapphire necklace he had given her for her 75th birthday glittering at her throat. She was laughing at something the Archbishop of Canterbury said, her head tilted back in that easy, unpretentious way that had captivated him for over 5 decades. She looked regal, comfortable in her own skin, a woman who had weathered the fiercest storms to stand where she stood now. His eyes then moved to the far side of the room, near the tall windows overlooking Hyde Park. His daughter-in-law, Catherine, the Princess of Wales, was surrounded by a small crowd of young artists and philanthropists, dressed in a flowing emerald gown that made her auburn hair seem to glow. She listened intently to a young painter, her expression one of genuine interest. She was the future, the people's princess, adored by a public that saw in her the same grace and warmth they had once seen in another young woman decades ago. Charles's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He loved them both, but in such different ways. Camilla was his sanctuary, his constant. Kate was the daughter he never had, the one who understood the weight of duty without ever complaining. He had hoped that time would heal the ancient, unspoken rivalry between them. He had hoped that his illness earlier in the year would have brought the family closer, fostering a new understanding. But as he watched them now, separated by the width of the ballroom, he felt a chill that had nothing to do with the November air. The moment came an hour later, as the formalities began to wind down. Guests were moving towards the dining room for supper. Camilla was making her way through the crowd. There's a perfectly polite smile fixed on her face. She was heading towards a small group that included the Prime Minister. Kate, having just excused herself from her own conversation, was on a direct path that would intersect with Camilla's. Kate saw her first. With a warm, genuine smile, she stepped forward. "Ma'am," Kate said softly, dipping into a graceful curtsy as she approached. "It's such a wonderful evening. The music is just beautiful." Camilla paused. For a heartbeat, on her expression was unreadable. Then, a smile appeared on her lips, but it was a curious thing. It was tight, controlled, and did not reach her eyes. It was a smile of ice. "Yes," Camilla replied, her voice quiet and even. "A lovely turnout." Her gaze flickered over Kate's shoulder, scanning the room, as if she was already looking for a more important person to speak to. The brief pause stretched into an awkward silence. Kate's smile remained in place. The professional smile of a royal who had been trained never to show discomfort. "How are you feeling?" Kate asked, her tone sincere. "I know these long events can be so draining." "I'm perfectly well, thank you," Camilla said. The words clipped. She made no reciprocal inquiry about Kate's own health, despite knowing that Kate was navigating her own challenges behind the scenes. The icy smile remained. "If you'll excuse me, I promised the Prime Minister a word. And with that, she stepped around Kate and continued on her way, leaving the Princess of Wales standing alone in the middle of the ballroom floor. Across the room, Charles saw the whole thing. He saw the flash of hurt that crossed Kate's face before she quickly masked it. He saw the way she straightened her shoulders and walked calmly towards William, who had been watching from the sidelines, his own jaw tight. Charles felt a hot surge of anger rise within him. He struggled to hide it, forcing his face into a neutral expression as a footman offered him a glass of water. But his hand trembled slightly as he took it. The public insult, however subtle, was a crack in the facade he had worked so hard to build, and he feared it was a crack that would only deepen. To understand the frost in that glance, one had to travel back half a century to a time when the world was a very different place. The story of Camilla and Charles was not a fairy tale that began with a wedding, and it was a tragedy that began with a parting. They had met in the early 1970s, two young people from the same aristocratic circles, sharing a love of the outdoors, of horses, of laughter that was not bound by protocol. For Charles, Camilla was everything he needed, warm, unpretentious, and utterly herself. But the Royal Navy and the expectations of his family tore them apart. While Charles was at sea, Camilla, pragmatic and realistic about her place in the world, and accepted a marriage proposal from her longtime suitor, Andrew Parker Bowles. Charles was devastated. He wrote letters of heartbreak, but he understood the rules. He was the Prince of Wales, and she was now a married woman. For years they moved in the same circles, a friendship maintained with careful politeness, a silent understanding between them. Then came Diana. In 1981, a young, shy, and beautiful Lady Diana Spencer captured the world's imagination. She was the perfect virgin bride and the future queen. The marriage, however, was a gilded cage for them both. Charles, unable to forget his first love, resumed his relationship with Camilla. For Diana, it was a constant, agonizing source of torment. She famously said, "There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded." The late 80s and early 90s were a battlefield. The leaking of the intimate Camilla-gate telephone call in 1992 was a watershed moment. The public heard a private, foolish, and deeply human conversation between two lovers. The mockery was savage. Charles's approval ratings plummeted. Camilla became the most hated woman in Britain. She was vilified in the press, hounded by photographers, and publicly abused. She was spat at in the street, called every name imaginable, the Rottweiler being the most printable. She became a prisoner in her own home, afraid to even go to the supermarket, relying on friends to do her shopping. And the divorce from Diana in 1996, and then Diana's tragic death in a Paris tunnel the following year, plunged the situation into an even more complex and silent agony. In the court of public opinion, Camilla was the villain in an unwatchable tragedy. For years, she was forced to remain in the shadows, a silent presence at Charles's side, while the nation mourned the princess it had lost. It was during this time that 2 young princes grew up without a mother, their grief a private, unspoken weight. And William, in particular, the elder and more protective son, watched his father's relationship with Camilla with a wary and wounded eye. He was polite, always polite, for the Queen demanded it. But the wound was deep. Camilla represented the pain his mother had endured. It was a shadow that no amount of time could fully dispel. From the moment Kate Middleton entered the royal orbit, the dynamic shifted in ways both subtle and profound. When William and Kate began dating at the University of St. Andrews, the palace watched with cautious optimism. Camilla, however, was reportedly less enthusiastic. According to royal authors, she was initially a bit of a snob about Kate's middle-class background, a family that included a flight attendant and coal miners. It was said that Camilla whispered in Charles's ear, encouraging him to advise William to either commit to Kate or set her free, a conversation that some believe contributed to the couple's brief split in 2007. Whether the whispers were true or not, the perception of them created a new layer of tension. Kate, with her flawless public image and intuitive understanding of royal duty, was a stark contrast to the controversy that still clung to Camilla. William, fiercely protective of his wife, was acutely aware of any slight, real or perceived. He saw the way Camilla had been treated by the press, but he also remembered the way his mother had been treated. His loyalty was, and always would be, tied with Diana's memory and with Kate. Despite this, the years brought a fragile peace. Kate, pragmatic and kind-hearted, made a conscious effort to build a bridge. She treated Camilla with respect, never being dismissive, always including her. In turn, Camilla softened. The two women were photographed laughing together at public events, a display of unity for the cameras. A source once noted that Kate liked Camilla because she brought a real-life relatability to the family, and that Camilla liked Kate because she was genuine. Charles, ever the optimist, believed the wounds of the past were healing. He doted on Kate, publicly calling her his beloved daughter-in-law, the daughter he never had. But the peace was built on a foundation of unspoken history. It was a truce, not a treaty. And as the line of succession drew closer, as the king's health faltered, the question of the future, and who would hold the power in that future, began to loom ever larger. And the underlying rivalry was less about personality and more about legacy. For Camilla, her position was hard-won. She had endured decades of hatred to become queen. For Kate, her position was her destiny. She was the future queen consort, beloved by the public. As Charles's reign progressed, the quiet competition for influence, for public affection, for the very soul of the monarchy's future, simmered beneath the surface. A few weeks after the gala, the royal family gathered at Sandringham for a private weekend. It was meant to be a retreat, a chance to step away from the relentless pressure of public life. Charles, still managing his health, hoped for peace and quiet. He got anything but. The incident that shattered the calm happened on a rainy Saturday afternoon. The family was scattered around the main house. William and his children were in the library playing a board game. Kate was in the kitchen with the staff, helping to arrange flowers for the dining table. Charles was in his study, reviewing papers. Camilla was in the drawing room reading. It started with the children. Prince George, curious and energetic, had run into the drawing room looking for a book. He politely asked Camilla if she knew where the animal encyclopedias were kept. Camilla, distracted, pointed him vaguely towards a corner and returned to her book. A few minutes later, Charlotte came looking for her brother. In her haste, she accidentally bumped into a small side table, knocking over a delicate porcelain figurine. It was a cherished piece, a gift to Camilla from her sister. The figurine shattered on the hardwood floor. Camilla's reaction was immediate. She stood up, her face flushed with frustration. "Oh, for heaven's sake!" she exclaimed, her voice sharper than she intended. "Look at this mess! Charlotte, you must be more careful!" Charlotte's bottom lip trembled. She was only 8 years old, and the Queen's voice was terrifying. George stood frozen by the bookshelf. At that moment, Kate walked in, drawn by the noise. She saw the shattered porcelain, her daughter's frightened face, and Camilla's irritated expression. In an instant, Kate crossed the room and knelt beside Charlotte, pulling her into a gentle hug. "It's all right, my love," she whispered. "It was an accident. These things happen." Kate looked up at Camilla, her eyes holding a quiet but firm protectiveness. "We are so sorry about the figurine," she said, her voice calm but cool. "Of course we will replace it." Camilla looked at the scene, the protective mother, the frightened child, and for a moment her icy composure slipped. She saw herself, not as the queen, but as the intruder, the one who had caused the upset. It was a ghost of the past, the feeling of being the outsider in this family. "It's fine," she muttered, her voice devoid of warmth. She turned and walked out of the room. William, drawn by the commotion, met Camilla in the hallway. He saw the expression on her face. "What happened?" he asked, his voice guarded. "Perhaps you should ask your wife," Camilla replied coolly, brushing past him. William found Kate and the children in the drawing room. Charlotte was calmer now, but the tension in the room was palpable. Kate explained what happened, her voice low. "It was an accident, William." But the way she spoke to Charlotte. She didn't finish the sentence. Though William's face hardened, he walked straight to his father's study. He didn't knock. "We need to talk," William said, closing the door behind him. Charles looked up, surprised by his son's abrupt entry. For the next 20 minutes, father and son argued in hushed, furious tones. William spoke of respect, of family, of the need for Camilla to understand that his children were not to be spoken to harshly. Charles, defending his wife, tried to explain that it was a moment of frustration, and that she was under stress. But William was unmoved. "She has been under stress for 30 years, Papa," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "That doesn't give her the right to make my daughter cry." Charles struggled to hide his anger. He was caught in the middle, the king of a vast realm, yet powerless to broker peace in his own home. The argument ended in a stalemate, a deep, frigid silence settling over the house for the rest of the weekend. But the days following the Sandringham incident were marked by a polite, frosty silence that everyone could feel, but no one dared to speak of. Charles was a man under siege, his health a constant concern, and now his family was fracturing before his eyes. He threw himself into work, attending meetings, reading state papers late into the night, anything to avoid the empty, tension-filled rooms of his private quarters. Camilla, for her part, retreated into her own world. She spent hours on the phone with her sister, Annabelle, her only true confidant. "They don't see me," she whispered one afternoon, her voice thick with a rare vulnerability. "After everything, after all these years, I am still just the other woman to them. A moment of frustration with a child, and I am the villain again." Her friends saw a side of her that the public never did. The worry lines etched deeper around her eyes, the way her hand trembled slightly as she held her tea. And she was fiercely protective of Charles, acting as his gatekeeper, the only one who could convince the ever-driven king to rest. But she felt utterly alone in a family that still, in its heart of hearts, saw her as an interloper. Kate, meanwhile, was the picture of grace under pressure. She continued her public duties with a serene smile, visiting children's hospices and supporting early childhood development causes. But those close to her noticed a new reserve. She was polite to Camilla in the few forced interactions they had, but the warmth was gone, replaced by a professional, icy courtesy. She focused on her own family, her own future. The bond she had with Charles remained strong. He was the doting grandfather, the father-in-law who valued her opinion. But with Camilla, the door had closed. The breaking point came unexpectedly, during a small family lunch to celebrate Princess Charlotte's birthday. It was an intimate affair in the gardens of Windsor. The children were laughing, playing on the lawn. Charles beamed with grandfatherly pride. For a moment, the tension seemed to ease. After the cake, as the adults sipped coffee, Charlotte ran up to Camilla, clutching a small, hand-drawn picture. "For you," the little girl said shyly, holding up a drawing of a rainbow and a large, smiling figure she had labeled the Queen. It was a peace offering from an innocent heart. Now Camilla looked at the drawing, then at Charlotte. The memory of the shattered figurine and the little girl's frightened face flashed in her mind. This was a chance to mend things. A simple, genuine smile and a "thank you" could have thawed the ice. But instead, Camilla's instinct for self-preservation, hardened by decades of public scorn, kicked in. Perhaps she felt self-conscious, unsure how to react. Perhaps she feared that accepting the gift would look like a concession. She gave a tight smile, the same icy smile from the gala, and said, "How thoughtful." She took the drawing, glanced at it briefly, and placed it on the table beside her, turning immediately to say something to Annabelle, who was seated nearby. It was a tiny dismissal, over in seconds, but Charlotte's smile faltered. She looked at her picture, placed on the table and ignored, and then back at her grandmother, who was now deep in conversation with someone else. And the little girl quietly turned and walked back to her brothers. Kate saw the whole thing. She saw her daughter's hopeful face fall. She saw the drawing abandoned on the table. Something inside her broke. She didn't make a scene. She simply stood up, walked over to the table, picked up the drawing, and gently took Charlotte's hand. "Come on, sweetheart," she said, her voice soft and steady. "So let's find a special place for this in our house." She led Charlotte away without a single glance back at Camilla. William, who had also witnessed the scene, looked at his father. The look on his face was not one of anger, but of deep, profound disappointment. Charles saw it, and his heart sank. The chance for reconciliation was gone. Camilla, realizing her mistake a moment too late, looked at the empty chair where Charlotte had been sitting. For the first time, she looked genuinely lost. But the damage was done. The divide between the two women was no longer a crack in the foundation. It was a chasm.